excuse me that I never introduced myself. My name is Alexis Rain Behill. I am Western Shoshone. I hail from the Smoke Band of Elko, Nevada. And today I have the great honor of introducing someone that I have not known of for very long, but I had the opportunity to read her book, Decolonial Daughter. And I think the importance of this event that I've been talking to so many people about is this concept of pan-indigeneity. That Indigenous people need to be able to combine and collectivize within ourselves and stop dividing ourselves by tribes, by nations, by continents. And at this point, I think that that's the key in this. We need to continue to remember that we cannot divide ourselves no longer if we want to have collective resistance and liberation. And so it is my honor to introduce Leslie Ann Brown, a Trinidadian American writer, poet, educator, and author of Decolonial Daughter, which we'll be selling outside for $18. That's damn near free. You can't afford not to buy it. The book is a collection of letters written to her son. She focuses on contextualizing her and her son's existence in a post-colonial and supposedly post-racial world, and where there are very many machines of so-called progress that have been promised at the demise of her lineage. Through these letters, Brown writes the past into the present, from the country that has been declared the happiest place on earth. Oh, she's living in Denmark now, but is from Brooklyn. Brooklyn.
Yeah, totally.
Sorry about that. And creating a version of the world that is necessarily alternative to the dystopian one being created and sold and bought. So please welcome Leslie Ann Brown.
Thank you so much for the invitation and the spirit that you both have organized, and for everyone for showing up. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit. I'll read a couple of pieces for you, so you'll definitely get that. But I wanted to share some of my experiences, because I have lived in Copenhagen, Denmark for 20 years, the happiest country in the world, right? And so I like to say that I have a PhD in whiteness, because it don't get more white than that. Scandinavia. I did my field work, right? And so I want to share a little bit my experiences on the ground of what's going on in Europe, because I don't know if you're familiar with what Europe's own version of the so-called migrant crisis. Does anyone want to speak about that? Does anyone know about that? What's going on in Europe? Yes?
Is it like the migration from like the people from Yemen or like Syria?
From all the countries that we bomb? Yes. Yeah, right. And from Africa, right? So black and brown bodies, mostly from countries that our governments have agreed to go in and bomb, and people who look just like us, yeah? All of us in this room, yeah? So, yes?
I was just going to add also, there's massive Islamophobia intertwined with the anti-immigrant policy and sentiment there.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so funny with the whole word Islamophobia, because I'm like, why don't we just call it anti-Semitism? Because people from that region is, so it's interesting. Anyway, so I've been there for 20 years, and the 20 years that I've been there, I arrived in Denmark just when I call it the white wing. People say the right wing, I say the white wing. As soon as they started to take a hold, right? I got there just in time, like the nick of time. They were just tightening stuff up. They were like, there are too many brown people coming in, basically, right? So I have witnessed what's been going on in Denmark, and you have to understand the role that Denmark is playing in this whole white supremacy ideology that's running shit right now. Because the guy who, you guys remember what happened in Norway a few years ago, right? This Norwegian guy went and he shot up, he bombed the place, and then he went to a youth, shot up a lot of children actually. And now he's in jail, and he wrote his manifesto. Yeah, do you guys remember
Is
that?
that Oslo or what was it?
No, is it Breivik?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he wrote this manifesto, and in this manifesto, we have to understand this white supremacy. I think a lot of you in here probably already know this, but we know that white supremacy, I mean, we don't need the New York Times to tell us that it's a global phenomenon. They're well connected, organized, and it's not just a figment of some of our imagination that is actually on the rise, right? And has been on the rise for quite some time. And some people even suggest that, you know, with World War II, the Nazis never, you know, it never really went anywhere. It appeared that they lost, but maybe they didn't, you know? Maybe they didn't, and ideologically. And I know that's a part of a radical thing to say, but I ask you to kind of look into what I'm saying, right? So anyway, so he wrote this manifesto, and in this manifesto, he praises Denmark for its immigration policies, its very strict immigration policies. Part of which you can see now, because what they're doing in Denmark, and Denmark again is on the forefront for Europe, people are really, you know, white nationalists are really praising Denmark for its positioning in terms of if I came and sought asylum in Denmark and they decided not to give it to me, then they can put me into a deportation center and make my existence so miserable that the idea would be that I will voluntarily go home, which of course is not a possibility if I'm gay and coming from a country that persecutes homosexuality, if I'm a political, you know, if politically not getting along with the government, etc. So, you know, this is what Denmark is doing, you know, and children are also in these camps, and, you know, there's barbed wire, fences, no hot water, the food. I mean, you know, so people in the happiest country in the world, you have black and brown people living under these circumstances. And part of what I try to, you know, really give voice to as much as I can is that it is only black and brown bodies. From the moment Europeans rolled up on us, their whole economy has been literally on our backs, policing our movement, keeping us, you know, in concentrations. You know, one of the things people don't understand with the way that the relationship between Europe and America, because Europeans like to play this cute joke where, oh, Americans are so barbaric, without recognizing that, well, where do they come from? Right? So we got to really, you know, so part of what I'm also doing is really trying to, you know, solder that together again. Be like, hey, there's no disconnect. This mentality is, you know, this, which worked like a virus, yeah, and which started in Europe. I mean, the people who we are calling who's the European people are conquered people. They once had indigenous experiences, right, with the land and with their sovereignty, and then, you know, some people decided, hey, we can terrorize you for hundreds of years until you submit to the cross and to the king and the queen and the, right? Do you guys see this pattern? That this is, can we all agree that this is where it started? Just to, you know, because I like to really, you know, I like to connect the dots. I like to connect the dots because it is all, just like our ecosystem, it is all connected, right? So I'm in Denmark, and I'm, you know, in Denmark every 6 months, they like to use the N-word to get people up in an uproar, you know, like cyclical. They're like, okay, let's piss off some black people now and use the N-word. All sorts of stuff that goes on. That I don't think is an accident. I do think there's some sort of power in riling people up and making them feel powerless, actually, you know? So there's a sort of, you know, I call it a white magic that goes on, the way that racism works, yeah? You know? And if you understand where I'm coming from, like truly, if you spend time with me, when I say white, I'm not attributing what we have been socialized to think about as in terms of whiteness, you know? Because blackness to me is full of life, full of possibility, fertile. That's where life is ignited. So blackness to me is a beautiful and a bountiful thing. You know, that is white. You know, maybe it's not what we've been conditioned, I think, purposely to think about in terms of whiteness. Whiteness is like absence of color, you know? And there are no white people, you know? So when I'm talking about blackness and whiteness here, understand I'm talking about a mentality. It's a mentality. In Trinidad, if a Trinidadian think they get too good for someone, they say, what happened to you? You think you're white? Because from our experiences with colonization, there's only white people that act like that, right? You think you're better than other people because if you're coming from an indigenous or, you know, someone from the black diaspora, which is also indigenous as well, we understand that, you know, it's not about the ego, right? But this is the virus that came. The virus that came, we all now in this culture have a very heightened sense of ego. If you want to make it, you have to stand out, we're very competitive, scarcity is not enough, right? How can there not be enough on this beautiful planet that we all are so blessed to be on? You know? So I wanted to talk to you about a few things before I go into to my poems. So I was teaching in Denmark and writing, and my last experience was very traumatic, and I want to share it with you because I want you all to understand the connectivity and the global picture here of what's happening to particularly black and brown bodies, right? I taught at an adult education center. Most of my students were either refugees or what they call second generation Danes, which is, you know, like, what is that? What they mean is that it's a Dane of color, right? And then the Danish underclass. So Denmark has a very big middle class, you have to understand that. So, you know, you don't see the extreme poverty that we see in the US, for example. Okay, just so you know. So, but there's a very small underclass. That was who I taught. These people who I taught were in war. You know, I met several young men who from Afghanistan who walked from Afghanistan. You know, because our country decided to invade it, looking for you know, I guess opium, right? So Somalia, from all over, you know, all countries where our country had a hand in going in and making the conditions so horrible that these people had to flee, right? And these people had a lot of stress, whether it's from, I mean, having to uproot from your home is stressful. I know that. I uprooted myself voluntarily with much privilege, and it was still very stressful. So I cannot imagine what it's like for someone to be driven from their homeland because of war. You know? So I was working at this center, and I really had a great time. I used to spend a lot of time with my students just talking, because I wanted them to tell me about their lives, because I realized that one of the things that Danish people were doing, what we tend to do, because we're so culturally arrogant, Westerners in general, is that we assume these people had nothing to say. Yeah? We assume these people came from primitive cultures. Yeah? Which is so vastly not true. You know, Europe got its culture from like Africa and the Middle East, right? Right?
Yeah.
But all of a sudden we have to educate these barbarians, these uncivilized, you know? It's really, it was, so basically, you know, what an education should do is it should instill within its students a sense of dignity. That's my thing as an educator. If you don't feel a sense of dignity in your educational experience, the educational experience is not a successful one, right? So this experience that I was witnessing every day, besides what we did in my class, because in my class, you know, my whole thing was like, if I could just get these people to smile, I won. You know? To the point where, you know, we'd come and we had, you know, they spoke English, but, you know, my thing was like, I just wanted them to feel good because they looked so miserable and they, you know, that look of trauma, that it was horrible, you know? So that was my goal. My goal was to have a human experience in my classroom. So what my school did was they decided to let in more students than we had room for, right? So I started coming to class, and I had no classroom, yeah? So I had 3 classes, and I'd come to class, and then all of a sudden, someone else was in my classroom. So, you know, for a group of people who are already traumatized, etc., it whether it's from war or, coming from an alcoholic family in Denmark, it's, all trauma, right? So for me to be dealing with this demographic and then having, cultivated their trust, and then be put in a position where I was coming to school, and there simply wasn't any classrooms. And as a human being and as a teacher, you want to be that teacher that Hollywood likes to make movies about, right? You want to be able to pull through this, you want to be able to hey, we can do this, etc. But real life doesn't work that way, as we all know. I am, who I am. It was very, very stressful for me. My school, the administration didn't seem to, they were kind of gaslighting me about it. Yeah, we'll do something, and they didn't do anything. And I'm saying this all to you for you to understand that I realized, there was a moment in this when I realized that this school really does not care about these people. I had to have a moment where I was like, this whole school system that they're saying they're sending these migrants to, for lack of a better word, etc., they actually don't want them. They don't want them to succeed. What Europe wants is, they want a small amount of black and brown people to work in the serving, They don't want, this is what's going on in England with the Windrush generation, where they're sending back people, mostly elderly black people to the Caribbean, who were actually there legally. And part of that, what you have to understand, is that a lot of these now elderly black people from the Caribbean, they actually achieved some success in England. They were owning houses, etc., So you have to understand that there's this white jealousy that also plays a part. This idea in whiteness, again, not necessarily people, but the mentality, where they don't want people of color at all to have any kind of material success, especially if they're not having it. And we know what the economy, what capitalism is, and what it promises, and how it's falling short with everyone. Doesn't matter what color you are, right? It's kind of failing most people. But shh, don't tell anyone that. Right? So I realized, I was like, okay, this school really, it has the pretense, it's talking the talk, but they're really, really not interested in these human beings succeeding. And that was the moment when I was just like, okay, I cannot save this ship, I have to leave, because what is going on in Denmark, in terms of how it's treating its population of color, is very, very, I think, a really good example of what's actually, it's a microcosm of what's going on a larger scale under white supremacy. Right? You guys with me?
Yep.
Anyone disagree? Anyone want to say something? Any comment? Any questions about Denmark? So then I realized, I was like, okay, well, I just wrote this book, and maybe I ought to just travel with my book and spread my message of dismantling white supremacist, patriarchal capitalism, all that other stuff. Right? So this is where I am now. I've been traveling throughout the States and in the Caribbean, and now I'm here, talking about my book and the messages that are in my book. So there's this filmmaker called Isaac Julian. Has anyone ever heard of him? No? He's a black British filmmaker. He's actually pretty good. He made a lot of, in the 90s, movies about, I think, looking for Langston, about the possibility, I think, that Langston Hughes was gay. I think it was Isaac Julian. But Isaac Julian once said that you cannot judge someone's politics by how they look. What does that mean? You can't judge someone's politics by how they look.
That your identity doesn't determine your politics.
Yes. What do you think about that?
I think it's true.
Right, right. And I think it's something really important that we have to recognize, and we have to understand, and we have to really keep that up front, that just because someone appears a certain way doesn't mean necessarily that their politics is going to be one way or the other, right?
Yes.
So I think that's really important. I just want to put that out there. I call it my pre-ramble. So you have to keep that, put that in your pipe and smoke it, like my grandmother used to say. Remember that as I continue. So I'm going to start with a poem that will tell you a little bit more about who I am. And then you're going to tell me a little bit about yourself. And then I'm going to end with a poem. Okay? When I'm talking, you might feel very emotional. Okay? And it's okay. It's okay to feel emotions. I have to say this because emotion is the energy behind the motion. So think about what you're feeling instead of reacting to it immediately. Right? Understand why. You might try to understand why, I'm feeling uncomfortable here. Why do you feel uncomfortable? We can talk about that. But really pay attention. Your emotions, it's your map. You can use it as a map in terms of what it is you need to work on. So I start with this poem, and it's called Country, the Map to Liberation. And I start with a prayer. Oh, great grandmother spirit, give us your peace so we can love as you love us. Make us healthy so we can have a good life. We praise you, oh, great grandmother spirit. And this is, I think about my great grandmother whose birthday I share. Yeah? I start with a quote from Hamlet because there's no other greater white patriarchal literary force than Shakespeare. The undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, and that's from Hamlet. So I'm going to say country, and then you're going to repeat it after me, and you're just doing it to just sort of, we're instruments, right, all of us, so you can feel it vibrates in your body when you say country. Country! 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 Thank you. So how many of you ever do any of you ever get people ask you where you're from, what country are you from? Show me how many people, yeah, okay, go. So we know that, right? So you gotta ask me again. Country! 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 Thank you. And then again, someone's like, so, where are you from? What country are you from, right? Yeah? Country. It's an interesting word. So I look it up because I think, too often we use words thinking we know what they mean, but don't really know what they mean. And I really love to go into the root of things, which is why they call me a radical, right? So a country, it's a noun, and it's a nation with its own government occupying a particular territory, for example. Then it's a region associated with a particular person. Its roots, Middle English from Old French country, from medieval Latin contrata, terra, land lying opposite, which I think is really interesting, from Latin contra, against, opposite. Country! 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 What country are you from? And then I look at the word and I say cunt, and then tree. Right? So a cunt is a woman's genitals. A noun, right? And its roots, Middle English of Germanic origin, related to Norwegian and Swedish dialect kunta, which I think is really interesting when you think about roots in Kunta Kinte, and Middle Low German, Middle Dutch, and Danish dialect kunta. And then tree, it's a noun, and we know it's a woody perennial plant, typically having a single stem or trunk. It could be a thing that has a branching structure resembling that of a tree, for example, a diagram, like a family tree, right? So we have the word now, country. And I ask, what country are you from? What tree of cunts do you descend from? What is your maternal lineage? Who are the women who came before you? What are the names that you cannot remember? Or perhaps you do. Stitch your lineage back together with their names. Who is the woman through whose body you passed between the unseen to the seen? And who is the woman through whom she passed and over again, all the way back until she is free? And if you do not know, how does it play into perpetuating the powers that be? How does it play in strengthening the patriarchy? Why is it that the mother has been othered? Why is it that the mother has been smothered? Why is it that you know not your mother? Find out what gets in the way of that and destroy it. Yeah? So when I wrote this part, I wrote this poem really for the women, for migrant women, for all of the women around the world in history and now in the future, who have to uproot themselves from home. My friend told me, and I think it's New Zealand, the word for home is where the bones of your ancestors are buried. Like that's the relationship. So we who have to leave our homeland, with our children, and I feel very strongly about this because this is a very universal story. So I think of the women torn. I think of the children torn from mothers. Goddamn war. I think of the children whose mothers were raped. That's a tool of war. I think of the women whose lives are not valued. Don't Google how much a black woman is worth. Don't Google that. Who are the women who came before you? What are their stories? What are their names? Say their names, smash the patriarchy with their names. Countries have no borders. Countries have no flags. Countries have no military. Countries have no visas. Countries have no passports. From countries we do not flee. They are in our blood. So what is your country? The next time someone asks you, where are you from, what country are you from, start with the name of your mother and your mother's mother. And if you should not know them, name the name of the woman who have mothered you. And if you are without that, invent them from the very fabric of mythology that have come before you, so that in your utterance, they become real and present. I believe it is in the answering of this question that paves the road to liberation. I am the daughter of Beryl Balbierce. She is the daughter of Hildred Charles. Hildred Charles is the daughter of Francis Lopez, and Francis Lopez is the daughter of Rose Lopez. I just lost my grandmother. She was 94, so it's nice to say this poem, So then I rewrite Shakespeare, because I can do that. You can do that. That's the great thing. You can do whatever you want. That's the power of creativity. Like I always say, my spirituality is my creativity. Actually, you could actually sit. You could rewrite Shakespeare. We call it a remix. So, so the rediscovered country from whose born all travelers return. And there are a lot of cultures that practice that, by the way. When they ask you, well, where are you from, they will tell you their maternal lineage. There are many, many cultures that do that. Yeah? And you probably used to do it in Europe, too, until they, killed women for hundreds of years. That's deep. That's one of the points of my book, not just my point, I'm one of the voices in this, is really understanding that in Europe they had a femicide for hundreds of years. They killed their women. That's crazy, for hundreds of years. And then they came and unleashed their madness over here, right, in the Americas. But we have to really keep that connectivity in mind in trying to understand how this colonial force works and continues to work, because that's the terror in our DNA. That's the trauma, right? That's how the patriarchal white supremacy system works, because the women have been terrorized. for hundreds of years. That's why the men also submit to it, because they too, through the Inquisition, were terrorized, right?
Yeah.
So we have to understand, in terms of humanity, you know, how many of you know John Trudell? Yeah, exactly. And he talks about when the European asks the indigenous person, well, who are you? And the indigenous person answers, I'm human, that Columbus, or the European, Columbus being you know, you could use it for the European, he didn't understand what that was. Because by the time Europeans came here, their humanity had been terrorized out of them for hundreds of years. This is real talk, guys. This is real. This is not, nobody's making this up. This is real. But we need to connect the dots and keep them. These are, you know, history doesn't happen in a petri dish. It's not isolated, right? So keep it together. All right. So what are you guys afraid of? What are you fearful? We're going to talk about this, and then I'll do my my last poem. What are you afraid of, Todd?
I mean, I think the thing that keeps me awake at night is thinking about my children and their future. Yeah, I fear for their future in so many ways. Yeah. Other than that, yeah. But it seems like the one thing I should be able to do something about, but that I can't really.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
One of my biggest personal fears, I say, is sex trafficking in Native women.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes I have a lot of close family. And,
Yeah.
homegirls, and it's like, I don't know which one's going to be next sometimes.
Right. It's epidemic in some communities. People don't understand that. People aren't understanding that, people you know are going missing. Yeah. That's real. Yeah. I made a comment earlier today about taking the bus. I didn't realize how far you guys were from Phoenix. And I ended up going with Todd, and I made a joke that I was happy that I didn't go in the van because I didn't realize it was so long. I would have thought that he was abducting me. But I realized, as I said it, it wasn't even a joke.
Yeah.
You know, because when we talk about what we're fearful of as a woman, right? Like, I'm afraid of men. Not all men, you know, but I'm afraid of men. You know, that historical lesson has been implanted very well, right? I'm afraid of white people, right? I'm afraid of, like, you know, young white men with guns from the media, right? But at the end of the day, what am I fearful of? You know, that I will die? I mean, you know, that's at the end of, I mean, that's the biggest colonization, the colonization of the idea of death, you know, that we buy into this marriage and the material, that this is the only reality, right? That's a colonial idea, right? This is not the only idea. So when we become liberated from our fear, whatever it is, then we can be truly free. And I'm just saying all of this to you because a lot of people say, Leslie, you're so brave, you go and say what you want to say. And I'm like, I'm not really brave because I didn't say anything for many years when I lived in Denmark because I was going through post-traumatic stress, I didn't realize it. And I was afraid of everything. And then when I dove into that, you know, like, why am I acting like this to understand? Okay, I'm fearful. And then I got really afraid recently because I did a poem, which I'm going to read for you guys now, called Why'd He Go Home? And I did it in Norway. I was going to Norway to do it. And my friend in New York was like, Leslie, you can't say that poem. They're going to kill you. So I had to kind of go through that. I had to be like, okay, what, you know, do I want to be this woman who's known for, you know, telling Whitey to go home? And what does that mean for me? Should I have a bulletproof vest when I perform my poem? You know? But it's nothing. I mean, at the end of the day, but you go through that. We're all fearful of different things, and that's how many of us are controlled, right? That's how we're controlled. It's the fear. That's especially what's happening with capitalism, right? It's like we are controlled by our fear if we're not conscious of it. So I'm just speaking to you about all of this to be, you know, think about it. What is it that's stopping you? What is it that's controlling you? What is it, like, how can we truly liberate ourselves from this system? right? You guys ready to hear my poem?
Yeah.
I don't think you guys are ready.
I'm ready to hear it.
I know you are, but everybody else is just like, you guys need to, someone in here before I say my poem, tell me what your country is. Who knows? Tell me your country. Let's just have hear a few of you. Share your maternal lineage if you know it, or whatever resembles that, you know?
Harriet Ann and Mary Ann.
Uh-huh. Who's who?
Harriet Ann, my mother,
Uh-huh.
and my grandmother.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Do you know your grandmother's mother?
I don't.
Yeah. But is your grandmother still around?
No, neither of them.
Oh, no, okay. Is there someone you can ask?
No.
Oh, but you can probably access it in your mind.
Surely.
Totally, I think so. Yeah? Anyone else?
When we introduce ourselves, my clan is
Uh-huh.
Kohane, and that's what representing my mother's clan,
Right,
right? And that's near the water people.
right.
My second clan is my dad's clan,
Mhm.
but that's his mom's clan.
Right.
And so that's big water people. So it's
Oh.
Kotsoni.
Yeah.
And then goes back to my grandma, right? On my mom's side, her mom is Kiani, which is like town and house people.
Wow.
And then my dad's mom is Sistantin. Is people that have like a black streak on their forehead,
Okay.
like 14 or something.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like how we introduce ourselves as far as country.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Exactly.
It's pretty nice that how you broke down that word.
Thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for sharing that with me. And as you're talking, I'm like, because I'll show you one more observation before I read my poem. Teaching in Denmark, I've taught a lot of people from the so-called Middle East and from Afghanistan. And what really blows my mind is like, I'm from Trinidad. So Trinidad are a lot of people of African descent and East Indian. So you could be totally East Indian. And this is part of my whole, awakening, traveling around, is seeing how we all so much resemble each other. You know? Like I didn't understand that there were people in Afghanistan who looked Chinese. I didn't know that. the ethnic, the span of how people look from each other in Afghanistan alone, or Pakistan, or it's like anyone in this room could be dropped there and you would look like you belong. Anywhere in the world, because that's what we have to understand, right? So, when I talk about, my whole thing the other day was, I was like, okay, we need to I want to start a petition, because, and again, when I'm talking, guys, it's like kind of like in the tradition of Whitey on the Moon. How many of you guys know Whitey on the Moon by Gil Scott-Heron? A rat done bit my sister Nell.
With Whitey on the
Right,
moon.
her face and neck began to swell, but Whitey's on the moon. Exactly. So it's in that tradition, right? So it's like, I feel like I have to prime you guys up. So it's like, and again, the only way that colonialism works, the only way through which white supremacy, patriarchy, all that works so well is because we internalize it. We internalize it. And I stand in front of you as a woman, when I say I have Caribbean roots, the Caribbean was crazy in terms of during colonization. So I have a lot of different lineages coursing through my DNA. Yeah? And you see that a lot in the Caribbean, as in other places where there's colonization. But anyway, so when I say Whitey go home, I'm also talking about those things in me that I really don't like, and I'm also talking to all the white people who are taking over Manhattan. Because I really when I'm from New York, and it's changing so much, and I'm like, what did the indigenous people what did it feel like back in the day to see these swarms of Europeans coming? I mean, what did our ancestors feel? I mean, think about that. The end of the world has already happened for so many people. The end of their world. performance poem explores the emotional terrain traversed when European immigrants are spoken about in the same way black and brown migrants are in Western media. Yeah? It will be a collection of how European colonialism has impacted the so-called New World and its indigenous people. Yeah? So I say, this poem is a ghost dance. You who name your corporations after forests, you desecrate, manifest destiny. You who rape our mothers, brothers, fathers, you who own the land, you who steal our land, you who do not know the blood of your history, you who think you are superior, you who never question your origins, you who never question the hierarchy, you who invented the hierarchy. You, the architect who built boxes, you who orchestrated the norm, you who speak with double tongue, you who build the courthouses, you who invent the poor, you who don't like color, you who cannot tolerate the sun, you who invade the land of others, you who vomit your criminals onto the land of my ancestors, you who are the criminals in suits, you who give corporations personalities, you who criminalize love, you who gave us Trump, you who imprison us at borders, you who steal our children, our women, you who dump your garbage on us, you who steal our resources and say we're poor. You who steal our culture and say it's yours. You who call us cockroaches. You who lose our paperwork to say we are illegal. You who attempt to erase us. You who built the table. You who stole the land. You who bred us for hundreds of years. You who rape us and call us rapists. You who steal and call us thieves. You who invaded Turtle Island, etc. Dear Europe, it's time we have a talk. It is time we get our language and perspective straight. It is time we acknowledge once and for all that you are singularly responsible for all that is wrong with this world. First, let's get one thing straight. The U.S. is occupied territory. Australia is occupied territory. Canada is occupied territory. South America is occupied territory. New Zealand is occupied territory, just as Palestine is occupied territory. In none of these countries are the indigenous a substantial part of government. In none of these countries has those native been allowed any room for a dignified existence. Europe, take note of the historical havoc you have created. We did not want your diseases. We did not ask to be kidnapped. We did not want to be enslaved. We did not want our land to be stolen. We did not want your capitalist system. We do not value materials over human life. We do not desecrate water. Who owns the water? Where is the person who owns the water? In what city? In what country? How can water even be owned? But still you came in hundreds of thousands. Even when we shared what we have with you, there was no border to control to stem your flow. There was no wall to keep you out. You came, you took land, you raped our mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers. You killed us like game for hundreds of years. Let's get this straight. There are only a few things you are superior in, and that is your ability to be duplicitous, murderous, treacherous. There are only a few things you are superior in, that is your ability to be duplicitous, murderous, treacherous, and how your descendants forget. We do not want your rapists. You're pedophiles, you're white male superiority, you're defiling nature, but now you want to talk about saving the earth? When it is you, your corporations, your lifestyles, your culture that is wreaking havoc on this earth, our mother. There is nothing more life-hating than your ways. There is nothing more life-hating than your ways. Let's get this straight. You cannot get rid of us. We are of the earth. We are the earth. Europe, take back your children. Whitey, go home. Petition for Europe to take her descendants back. I'm going to have a petition you guys are going to sign. Go back to where you came from. Whitey, go home. Thank you.